Welcome to the Anxiety Crusher live event. So I go live every day, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. Pacific time. I talk about the 7-step reset. The 7-step reset is something I created for transformation. It's based on neuroscience and it's tied in with transformation. And we have a 90-day program, and this is about updating your habits or mastery of habit change. So there's plenty written about habit change, but most of it misses the mark, in my opinion, because it all treats the subconscious as a mind instead of the network of neurons, which is what it is. And that's a game changer, because once you see it as a network of neurons, you recognize how you apply strategies and tactics to make it work. Now that 7-step reset happens in less than a second, because that's what change is about. But I have it broken down into 7 steps, because we go every day. We have 33,000 on average decisions that we make per day. Now, if you consider that 95% of everything we do is done by habit, then that'll tell you that, okay, so maybe 31,500 of those are actually just habitual patterns. We're not actually making conscious decisions. Then it starts to make sense. That's only part of the story, though, because quote unquote those are decisions. If you look up how many micro stimulus response cycles does a person make in a day, you'll see something like 3 to 4 per second. So we're easily hitting over 100,000 stimulus response cycles a day. So our lives are actually created a quarter of a second at a time, because that's about what the habit reaction takes. And I'll show you that in the 7-step process. The other thing that we'll do today, because I started this last week, going live every day. I'll do this through December and November, and I invite coaches, counselors, consultants to come on stage with me, and we'll talk about their specialty, how it relates to this. And then also at the end of these, we allow people to come on stage, or we just do it through the chat, so that we can work on real world things. I have them talk about whatever they're struggling with. The reason I started this is because of the amount of change going on. So you may have heard the term VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And now there's a new one, BANI: brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. And if you look at the two of those, so VUCA is happening to us, right? The volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I would argue that a big part of that is the Moore's law, which was technology capability is going to double every 18 months. That was back in 1970. So we're in the very straight part, the vertical part of that curve, which makes sense. I mean, even artificial intelligence, we're seeing resets of that, new versions or different capabilities. It's really interesting how fast artificial intelligence now and the apps associated with that are going up. And so things are changing very fast. It's not going back, because the technology is here. It's not going back. But one of the things we can do is count on principles will still be true, because we live in a world that's governed by physics, and more so quantum physics rather than Newtonian physics. So you do want to understand that everything is atoms, and when you look at it from that point of view, you can make sense of a lot of things that may have been kind of off. Now, when you look at BANI, so that was VUCA, right? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity is coming at us. When you look at BANI, that's our experience, right? Brittle, anxiousness, nonlinear. Everything is coming from all over the place. What does it mean? And people are so close to fight or flight that things just don't make sense, and they don't have their full faculties. Because as you know, once we get stressed, we start closing out things, because it's about survival. And then the incomprehensible is we just don't understand what's going on. So the BANI is our experience to this. And the reason I started doing this is because I want us to lean back into having that agency and personal leadership. At the end of the day, that's what's still going to matter. I don't care what you do with technology, what happens with AI, what happens geopolitically. Ray Dalio talks about the 5 wars: the trade wars, geopolitical wars, capital wars, and then you have your military wars, and there's one that I'm missing on that. And those 5 wars, we're already in them. So, technology wars. So capital, technology, technology, geopolitical, and then military. We're already in those wars all around the world, and less so on the military side for the US, but we see these skirmishes starting to happen. And then he throws two bonus ones in there, cultural wars as internal within the country, as well as internal conflict. So we're seeing all of that happen right now. And but what we have is our agency and personal leadership, and we can't lose that. And the challenge now, because artificial intelligence has learned based on what works and has learned based on what's out there, we're seeing if you put in a prompt for Chat GPT or whatever platform you're using to give you some ad copy, let's say you use the Pastor framework ad copy, it's going to give it to you. It knows how to do that. And that Pastor framework is designed to tap into people's cognitive biases to get them to do things that they weren't thinking about doing, or maybe they don't even want to do. And at the extreme, it does do that. It hijacks a person's agency using cognitive biases. Now, artificial intelligence doesn't know how to do that, but it does it because it's learned based on advertisers for centuries have been using ad copy to get people to buy things. And so artificial intelligence doesn't really introduce something new. It accelerates what has already been happening. And because of that, we have to keep up. The 7-step reset is based on neuroscience. And if you look at most neuroscience, it goes back to, you can make sense of it from a hunter-gatherer time, because for thousands of years as hunter-gatherers, we lived in this tribal environment. We lived with tigers. And so that's why your fight or flight is at the tiger level. I mean, you read an email, why would we be in fight or flight? That's not existential, right? Having an email there. But in the hunter-gatherer, if you look at the conditioning from 0 to 7, which is when the majority of conditioning happens from age 0 to 7, it made sense there, because how you hunt and gather at 7 years old probably doesn't change by the time you're 35 years old. Today, our world, a 35-year-old's world today, is completely different than it was from 0 to 7. So that's just some examples of why this is important. Now, there's two parts of this. One is the 7-step reset, and I started doing that a couple of days ago, and instead of doing the entire 7 steps in one setting, I focused on steps 1 and 2, which is the pre-stimulus, and then today is the step 3. I'll bring this up just so that I have something to refer to. So what we have here is step 1 is pre-stimulus, beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, and physiology. And then we have your state, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional state, and then also your self-image. So this is pre-stimulus. This happens 33,000 times a day, as I was saying, and at a higher level, and then on a detail level, more like 100,000 times per day. But this is happening over and over. So it's pre-stimulus, conditioned reaction, and then response. And then we're here again, and here again, and here again, and here again, 33,000 times a day. So our cycles are priming us for the next one. And if it gets away from you, you've seen people get triggered, and they can't catch up with it. They're off and running. So I talked about these the past 2 days, and you can go back and look at those. You can also go to, and I'll put that in the chat, you can go to 7stepreset.com/live. And you'll find information there. You'll see a video that's right in the middle. So if you're new, start here. That's a good overview of the 7 steps. And I'll update that from time to time with other videos. And also it shows you where you can find this. So we're on several Facebook pages, and also you can use that page to come online. But I'll put that, and that link changes every day because that's the way the streaming software works. But so that's that's going to be there. So you can, if you have questions or thoughts, you can either go in the chat or you can invite yourself online, and I'll bring you up on stage. So now we're going to talk about this, and this is that quarter of a second that happens 100,000 times a day that is basically changes our life. And if we don't get a handle on this, we're just creating more yesterdays for tomorrow. We're making tomorrow just like yesterday, over and over and over and over, because we're priming ourselves back into this thing. So we have some rituals, tactics, and strategies. People have been talking about habit change since I can remember. Way back, I read Psycho-Cybernetics probably when I was around 18 or 19 years old. And back then, habit change, I became very interested in this topic, and habit change has always been a hot topic. James Clear wrote a great book, Atomic Habits. There are other good books on habits, but I think they all come up short in that they don't talk about the subconscious as the network of neurons. They talk about it as a mind. And when you talk about it as a mind, you can't distinguish between the you and your behaviors. So what I mean by that is, if I see a person and I'm describing their personality, I'm describing their behaviors. Well, their behaviors are from their habits, and the habits reside in the network of neurons. So the network of neurons, that's all associations from the past. It's not mental. It's cognitive, but it's not mental. They're associations from the past. It's impulses going through our neural pathways, and the neural pathways can be more effective and efficient through being wrapped with myelin, which is a process we can get through with deep practice. Activation, which is synaptogenesis, making sure there's enough neurotransmitter to move to those different neural pathways. These are things that we can do on purpose that don't have anything to do with the subconscious being a mind. It's all about the neurons. So once you see that difference, it makes habit change easier, because you start working on habits using things like myelin and synaptogenesis and neurotransmitter. And there's different levels of that, as well as coherence. And then you start looking at fight or flight, because a lot of your habits are actually survival reactions. And those survival reactions are because of your of fight or flight, or neuroscience terms, they'll say the sympathetic nervous system, and the inability for the parasympathetic nervous system to get us back to homeostasis to come into play, because we're so triggered over and over and over. Fixing that with the mind, you can't do it, because the subconscious processes at 11 million bits per second. The conscious mind processes at 50 bits per second. There's 100 billion neurons. Each neuron is connected to anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 other neurons. So you have these trillions of associations. The conscious mind simply can't keep up. So there are factors that we have in our brain to filter through what's important to us, and that gets applied in these 7 steps. Specifically this one. So in this quarter of a second, we've got roughly 2 to 3 million bits of information can be processed in that period of time. You can't solve that with the conscious mind. That's why the books that don't look at it from a network of neurons standpoint, I say, fall short, because you're trying to fix it with the mind and you can't do it. Mind's not fast enough. And then once you leave this step 3, now you're into the conscious mode. So we want to get that squared away right here. Now, to set this up, because I have 250 milliseconds, which is a quarter of a second, we have to condition the change that we want in here. We can't do it with the mind. We have to do it at the quarter second level. So the conscious mind comes on after another quarter of a second. So a half second you have between the stimulus and the response. You have the minimum of a half second if it's a real response. If it's just a reaction, you have a quarter of a second. But at a half a second, you're still not ready, because your conscious mind is just coming online. It processes 50 bits a second. You need a quarter of a second just to get 12 and a half bits of information processed. Meanwhile, the subconscious, or the network of neurons, has already processed 2.5 to 3 million bits of information. It's going to overpower the conscious. This is why we get off and running and get triggered. You have to be able to have that pause, but that pause has to be conditioned in. You can't put the pause in with the conscious mind, because the network of neurons is fear-based, and it's throwing all this peril at you. And the peril is fight or flight. Is coming at you fast. It's Serengeti tiger level threat. And so naturally, you're just going to jump right into the next thing. that is a very short way of talking about this. And then after that, you get 5 is emotional modulation, 6 is action, and then 7 is mindfulness. I'm going to bring up a slide that I have that looks at this. I thought I had the slide. Oh yeah, here we go. All right, so there is your 7-step reset. If you like, feel free to grab a. I'll put it here so you don't. So I'm out of the screenshot. Feel free to screenshot that. I'm going to pull up a couple of other slides that we'll use. Okay. So there you have the pre-stimulus, and this is ongoing. So step 1 is your beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming of mindset, and physiology. And these can be, each one of these affects the other. And again, you can go look at one of the previous videos to get more detail. I'm going to jump into the 7 performance areas. And so that's why I'm going to kind of rush through this. Get that slide to come up. Oh, there we go. So and then we were just talking about step 3, and tomorrow I'll get into step 4, 5, 6, and 7 a little bit more. But step 3 is an important one, but it's so quick, it's a quarter of a second, and people don't understand that this quarter of a second is governed by what you do here and what you do here, because we're doing this 33,000 times a day. So if you're already primed for fight or flight, then you're cooked right here. Step 1 is ongoing. This is where we prepare ourselves. This is the self-improvement stage. This is the personal development stage where we get better, sharpen the saw. Step 2 is a check-in to how are we doing with our mental state, our physical state, our spiritual state. How's our self-image? What's our self-talk look like? And what we do with the transformation work is when this is not right, we can go back here and adjust, because we have tools that you can use to adjust. And then we have the conditioned reaction. So your change is not going to happen here. You have to not consciously, you're going to have to program in the changes. So we program in the pause, we program in where the subconscious or the network of neurons is not fear-based, it's not looking for the threats and the perils, but rather it's looking for it's seeing things as neutral or positive. Now it's still, we don't remove, hold on a second. We don't remove the ability to notice threats, of course. It's just that the majority of the time, what we're facing is not like a Serengeti tiger. So we don't need the subconscious to be on alert for Serengeti tigers or people coming that we're meeting on the trail and who might be a threat. We're not looking for that. We don't need that. And there's multiple ways for us to get information about threats. There's news, there's emails, there's friends, there's just different ways of getting it. You have your phone. You don't need to be on alert for the next tiger that shows up, because you find out that there's a tiger loose on your phone way before you'll ever see it. And that's why we can condition in this change response. So now what happens is you have less noise getting through to the conscious mind for the response. You have less need for the emotional modulation. This is a 90-second process where we allow the energy to stay in motion and move through rather than get settled into our nervous system. And then step 6, now we can take action, do it, delegate it, delay it, or discard it. Now we can take that action because we're not being triggered. You don't want to take action while you're emotionally triggered, because you're probably going to make a mistake. I like to say, that trust is built on the escalator going up, but you can lose it by jumping out the window. And then step 7 is getting back to mindfulness, getting yourself reset, and it comes back right to here. So you can imagine you have multiple of these layered on top of each other as you're going. So when people think they're multitasking, they're really not multitasking, they're flipping back and forth. And you can have multiple of these going on at one time, but obviously you're better off if you can isolate. Now, the reason I've been saying I want to spend some time, I want to take a slight pause and come back to this. And to do that, I want to create some context as to why. And the context is the 7 performance areas. So the 7-step reset came about after the 7 performance areas. So the 7 performance areas are mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. And these are the 4 that we control. This is where we have our agency and our personal, our personal leadership. And then we have relationship, professional, financial. So you notice on the bottom very faintly it says be, do, have, because we want to become. This is the identity setting. This is where we get our identity. You know, the gurus will tell you that before you go after a quest, you want to get your identity right. Well, that's true. And this is a way for you to set your identity. So I would say every major quest, if you change your job, we need to reset the identity. If you start a business, we need to reset the identity. If you take on a new big project, it's helpful to reset the identity. This doesn't have to be a major operation. Then as you get better at it, it becomes faster and faster. You hear me talk about laps. So if I'm working with somebody in the 90-day program, we do laps around these four to get it ingrained and to get it internalized. Once you have it internalized, you can apply it over here very easily. What we don't want to have is for people to go after goals with the relationship, professional, and financial before they have this set, because they're going to be knocked all around. They're less likely to be aligned with their goals and their vision and their life design. And that's why we spend the time here. And the reason for the 7 steps is that the reason for the 7 steps is that in working through those 4, you'll have people who are strong with the mental or maybe strong with the emotional, but they're a little weaker on the physical and they need help with the habits. And that's why we do the 7 steps. So the 7 performance areas is the big picture. The 7 step is how we achieve it. Now, in the mental area, and there's a lot. I've said before that there's dozens of levers on this 7-step reset. I don't obviously pull out all the levers, and I don't talk about all the levers because it would be boring and quite frankly just doesn't make sense without the context. But when I see a situation, a person has a phobia type response, or maybe they're having trouble discerning the difference between the conscious and the subconscious, there's a different lever that I pull out. Maybe I focus more on breathing exercises to give that person some space. So it just depends. Maybe they're struggling with emotion. Maybe they're very emotional and they're hyper in that area. And so we spend more time on the emotional modulation. So it just depends. And in the mental area, just some examples. And some of these you may have heard about. You can Google every single one of them and learn something about it. One of them is transformational vocabulary. I use this in sales. Instead of rejection, we call it not appreciated. So rejection has power. It has too much strength. I don't want that to evoke that feeling that goes with rejection. I want to give it something that is less energized, and that word is unappreciated. So they just didn't appreciate the offer. So who's next? Someone's waiting, and you get back on the phone. Another one might be principles. I like to focus on principles. So the mental areas when we focus on principles, not hacks, not debating. People love to talk about the exception. Well, the exception kind of makes the rule, right? The exception says that there's a general rule. So you make your decisions based on the general rule. Another one I like to do is say, you don't want to just jump on plans that sound good. You want plans that work on a bad day of a bad week, because there will be bad days. There will be bad weeks. I remember talking to somebody and they were have a pie in the sky, and they're going to do all these things. It's going to happen in a certain kind of way. And I said, that's not reality. What do you mean? They said, like, what do you mean? I said, that in the real world, that's not going to happen. They said, well, I got to you have to keep me out of the real world. Don't talk to me about the real world. They were literally needing to stay pie in the sky for their formula to work. Well, that's not going to work on a bad day of a bad week. So you want to make sure you're using first principles thinking, that you're using critical thinking, and you're landing on good solutions. And these are habits. That's why I'm talking about it here. Because if you have weak links in these areas, then the 7 steps is going to be a weak link, because there's only so much you can do. You have to be tight in all 4 of these areas. Not expert, but you've got to have a baseline where it's not pulling you down or hurting you. Another one might be using frameworks. So in the mental era, we introduce using frameworks, and people have to be very quick to understand, hey, I'm being influenced through cognitive biases, or we're being influenced by priming, or we've got too much information, we have too many ifs, ands, and buts going on, and pull out a framework and start using frameworks. These are ways to slow things down, because remember, words can trigger you, and if they trigger you, you get back into that 11 million bits per second processing, the associations from the past, threats, fears, concerns, they all start to come in. The frameworks, for example, I love to do the 2-axis growth and profit. So it's not just revenue growth, it's revenue growth and it's profit. So you have profitable growth. You need to make some choices between those two. Another one might be probability and frequency, right? What's the probability that it's going to happen? And what's the frequency that it happens? Or probability and severity. What's the probability that it's going to happen? And what's the severity that it's going to happen? Somebody will spend so much money trying to prevent this thing that's super severe, but not probable at all. And then they'll ignore the things that are highly probable, but death by 1,000 cuts. So you want to be managing both of those. This is when it's good to bring out frameworks, because people go down that rabbit hole of thinking about just the one thing, the probability or the severity. And it could be different depending on the day, just depending on how they get triggered. Another one might be fast and slow thinking, maybe being able to distinguish between the conscious mind versus the network of neurons. This is huge, because the network of neurons, what's going through there are impulses, right? And that impulse is energy. And thought at its very base form is energy. So you got energy from thought, and you have energy from the network of neurons. And what you have is this confusion that people think the network of neurons is thought. It is not thought, right? And so ChatGPT is not thinking. It's or I should say AI is not thinking. It's giving you associations. It's giving you results of associations from its database. Cognitive processing is what's been called thinking, but cognitive processing is what's happening in the network of neurons. The mind is something different. The mind can create in the field of infinite possibilities. The network of neurons is focused on associations, which are from the past. Now, the next one would be physical. And physical, if I look at this, so mental is the one that you design it. This is where you design the life, but you're going to have to get a handle on the physical, because the physical is what drives everything. You need your heart, you need your brain, you need your nervous system. So if you don't have a handle, if you don't have the ability to get a handle on the physical, then you're cooked. And the physical is where the network of neurons lies. So this is huge. I can talk about it from biology, epigenetics, right? This is people, spontaneous remission. We know this happens. So you have epigenetics comes into play. Neurobiology, that's what I'm talking about with the network of neurons, synaptogenesis, myelin, the power of the central nervous system, allostasis and homeostasis, and all these things come into play, and how you can manage them. So you can understand it from the mental side, but we have to build a habit to actually live it, or else you're just going to get more yesterdays for your tomorrows. We also have the physiology, right? How we stand. We have heart rate variability. And heart rate variability correlates with willpower. So the higher your heart rate variability is, the higher your willpower, or the more access to willpower you're going to have. And then we have the breathing, and breathing is huge. If you look at any of the arts, even Navy SEALs, they train in breathing. Breathing is very, very important, because it's how we can center ourselves. And if you just consider that we can live seconds without blood, minutes without oxygen, days without water and weeks without food, it kind of tells you what the priorities need to be. So we need to have clean blood. And guess what? Good deep breathing cleans your blood. So, and movement cleans the lymphatic fluid. So while you can live months and years without exercise, you want to be moving because it cleanses your blood, and blood is number one. And then breathing is important. In fact, it's very helpful to reduce anxiety. So if you're, and that's what these things are about, crushing anxiety. When you're anxious, your breathing gets shallow and your breathing gets fast. But you can also create anxiety by fast and shallow breathing. So what we don't want to do is have fast and shallow breathing. So I literally train my system to have long, slow breaths. Yesterday, I was doing the 20 seconds in, 20-second inhale, 20-second exhale. But my normal morning routine is 10 minutes with 13 in, 13 out. And I do that for 10 minutes straight. And I use that while I'm hydrating. And it's just a 10-minute time where I'm getting to remind myself what's important. Because remember, I'm the you. I am the me. You know, if I'm talking to somebody, what I'm saying is what they are in that 10 minutes in this example, that's who they really are. And then the personality is just a network of neurons doing their thing. Neurons that fire together, wire together. And that's 10 minutes I get to remind myself of what's important to me. 10 minutes where I get to think about my priorities. 10 minutes where I get to think about what's not right yet and then adjust my day. And then physiology is huge, because if you stand with courageously, you're better equipped to handle that next thing that's coming. If you're already in a defeated posture, fight or flight is so easy to happen from that place. And then spiritual is the next one. So I like to call this awareness of awareness. You're aware that you're hearing me talk about awareness, and now you're aware that you're aware of that. We can keep going. Awareness of awareness of awareness. You might be aware that you're scrolling, and you said you're going to stop scrolling on social media by 9 o'clock, and you're still scrolling. It's 9:15, and you're aware that you're aware of this, that you're not doing what you said you would do. This is that spiritual part that comes into play, where you start listening and paying attention and honoring what you said was important. This is where you spend time, where I spend time in that 10 minutes. If I'm continuing to scroll, even though I said I wasn't going to scroll, that 10 minutes is a chance for me to reset and rethink, okay, so what's going on? What am I avoiding? What's not right yet? What can I do differently? What's the tactic I'm going to use? What's missing that's causing me to scroll? That's where I get to do that in that 10 minutes. But it's being aware that I have to take action. I'm not just going to let it keep riding and riding and riding. That's, again, how we get more of our yesterdays for our tomorrows, which is not what we want. The other thing I would say comes into play here is coherence. So if you have coherence, I'll go to the pad for this one, because it's a useful picture. Now, what I'm describing here, if you have coherence, let's say that this is just how you're going through the day. This is your internal system. This is your internal system. And you have your coherence there, and then you have the outside limits. When you have a lot of coherence, like this is depicting, right? We have our nice coherence, everything is flowing through. When we have that, we have a small amount of chaos and a small amount of rigidity. And that's manageable, right? We can handle that. This is just life, right? Stuff just happens. But if you're too rigid, you have a fixed mindset. And if you're too rigid, you're going to have a fixed mindset. And if things are too chaotic, you're going to be all over the place. You won't be able to focus. Now, if we take this same idea, but we draw it this way, so now we have less coherence. Our coherence is much narrower, but our outside limits are the same. And now we have only a small amount of coherence. But what you have out here is a lot more chaos and a lot more rigidity. And you can see this in organizations. You can see this in the workplace. You can see it with your friends. I mean, things get stressed out. People get rigid. You can see somebody go from a growth mindset to a fixed mindset in an instant just because of something that happened to them. And sometimes you just need to back away. One of the things I talked about in the 7-step reset is this step 2. When we're in this step 2 as a leader, you have to recognize what state that person is in. Too often, I see leaders do this all the time, that they can see, it's obvious that the person is getting towards that rigidity or towards that chaos, or they're getting towards fight or flight, and the leader will still plow through and push their agenda, and the person's already put the wall up. Salespeople have learned to do this because they don't get paid if they keep doing that. They've learned to back off and let the person get some psychological air. You've got to let them talk about it. And leaders need to do more of that, because unfamiliarity creates stress. And if you're introducing something new, people are going to be stressed out. You may want to spread that new thing you're introducing over several days. And then we have the emotional. And I often say that emotional is the gateway to the right side, because after you get this straight, this is totally in our control. What we think, what we choose to think, and because of the 7-step reset, we can control the physical piece too. We can master our habits. And this spiritual is not the real spiritual realm. It's our higher self. It's our, what I say, interacts with the spiritual realm. This is our self, our awareness of awareness, our consciousness, our present moment. And then the emotional is in our control, but too many people have given that away, and they've allowed other people to be able to push their buttons. We don't want to have buttons that can be pushed. And this is why you have the emotional modulation and letting it run through. Sometimes this takes weeks for people to resolve a lot of the emotional, because remember, if they dwelled on emotions, it's sitting in their network of neurons, so to speak. It's a neurobiological event that we've got to neutralize and remove and allow that to flow out, so that they have that conscious present moment, purity of thought, purity of mind, no threat, no regrets of the past or anxiety of the future. And now we have that pure consciousness, that those present moments. So we do have an emotional modulation approach here, and we do have processes to work through that, so you're not going to get emotionally triggered. And once you get that resolved, and now we're working on the 7-step process. And you're working on the 7-step process. Once we have that resolved, you do that emotional modulation over here. You're not triggering yourself for these 33,000 decisions that we're making per day. And that's 0 to 90 seconds. So as I said earlier, this whole thing takes less than a second. But if you are triggered, then you take up to 90 seconds for the emotional modulation. That could make this take more than a minute, could take 2 minutes. But because of what we do here, where we've taken care of our beliefs, so we're not being triggered unnecessarily, we've mastered habit change with the neuroplasticity, we're not so prone to being primed, because we're priming ourselves, and we can recognize when priming is coming from somewhere else. And priming and cognitive biases are highly connected. And then we have the mindset. It's not just having a growth mindset, it's being able to get back to a growth mindset instantly. And I'm talking about in seconds, not minutes. And then having a physiology that's going to empower us and enable us. We have the check-in, and if we're not liking where we are from a mental, physical, spiritual, emotional state, or we have some negative self-talk, we go back here and fix that up. You maybe take a break and do a couple of minutes of box breathing. Box breathing for box breathing breath cycles, 4 counts in, hold for 4 counts, 4 counts, exhale, hold that for 4 counts. You do that cycle 4 times, you have a minute. You can take a 2 or 3 minute break and just do a series of box breathing and get back on track. We don't have to live in this state. And everyone has experienced something really bad happen. For me, because I, was a teenage driver, whatever, speeding, I got a lot of tickets, and I remember when the lights would light up behind me, my heart would jump. That happened for years. Now, obviously, I know how to solve that now, but that would stay in the system, right? And you have that neurobiological event, the adrenaline and cortisol is in the system. We don't have to live with that. And then we have our quarter of a second. This is where we change our lives. This is where we go after our life design by managing that quarter of a second. So that was a lot. I wanted to combine the two of those. Moving forward, most of the conversations were about the 7-step, because the 7-step is what we can do right away. And the reason I started doing these was to help people get a handle on the anxiety. They lost a job, they're laid off, they're worried about getting laid off. I want to be able to solve that, because people want to be at their best when it comes time to looking for a new job. We don't want them coming from underneath. We want them on top, right? And then getting that job, because a person in protective mode and fear mode is not going to be at their best. We want people at their best. So that's why I started doing these live events. So more of the conversations will be about these 7 steps. But I can't really talk about this without having the context of the 7 performance areas, because that's the target. We're going after the mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, relationship, professional, and financial, and having those at a high level so that those all become enablers, empowerment catalysts. We don't want them to be resistance factors. And too many people are walking around with the poor physical health, or maybe not understanding what their self-talk is doing to them, maybe not paying attention to breathing, not doing the things for the blood, not understanding allostasis and how to leverage that, allowing themselves to be emotionally hijacked. All of those things are going to impact what happens on the right side, relationships, professional and financial. So I'll do this live. You can tune in again tomorrow. Again, I will leave time at the end. If people want to join in, they can use that link, or they can just send me a chat and we'll talk about it on chat. And invite your friends. These will sit out on the page wherever you're watching this. And you may have to scroll down to see the yesterday or the day before, because I also post other content. But you can forward that to anybody you see going through anything. If they're changing jobs, just send this to them. This is all about helping people get through this, especially in the US, because we got some internal and some political stuff, geopolitical stuff. And as I mentioned, the 5 wars: geopolitical, trade wars, capital wars, technology wars, and military wars. All of that's happening all at the same time, and it doesn't make it easy. So then you got the VUCA and the BANI, and this is our way. No matter what happens, you can always come back to this. All right, we'll see you next time.